Jacksonville, a child was born who couldn't sit still. 86 years later with no regret. You know that man can't sit still yet. The Great Depression couldn't get him down. He worked for his dad's store in town, collecting money in small amounts. The poor whites and blacks in their furniture accounts. Stetson Kennedy wants us all to be free. Stetson Kennedy wants us all to be free. As he'd collect, he'd talk to folks. He'd hear legends, tales, songs, and jokes. Now this fine treasure he'd record and write. He was colorblind, didn't see black and white. Writer's project for the WPA. Zora Neale Hurston, he earned his pay. Crackers and blacks, they talk for hours. It was a barefoot history in this land of flowers.
On the 15th of December 2018, the week that was, from WBRN Radio and on the Boston Red Network. An interesting week indeed. On Friday, we had a court in the very red state of Texas, as Bloomberg called it, obliterate Obamacare, or gutted, or whatever word you want to have. His ruling there, and we'll get to it in a minute, and actually read from the case itself. We like to go to a primary source when we can, and we will append this case on the broadcast so you can look at it also. The case itself, obviously you don't want to read the whole case, but parts of it. And from the state of Georgia, Uncle Carl Rove, he's writing again in the Wall Street Journal about our own Stacey Abrams and her campaign for justice, equality, and the American way in the state of Georgia. Very interesting diatribe there. And we'll look at Amazon workers in the upper Midwest that had an action on Friday also. We'll take a look at it. And we'll do the sports as we normally do. And take a look at where the college hoops, college football, there are also college hoops going on. So there's a lot of sport going on around. And we have that survey from the Emerson people, a poll actually, that they put out this week. We'll get it in the broadcast here. And we'll also look at a song. It's, Cold Out Tonight, or whatever it was. Dean Martin sung it, Crosby sung it, and a number of other people use it, and some radio stations now are banning it. Kind of an interesting situation. Are we going culturally in America back to the days of the Puritans? That doesn't work very well, those reactionary trends that are out there. But first we'll go to the Affordable Care Act. It was decided in Fort Worth, Texas. And let's just go to the top of caption. We always like to get these captions in. So we'll have it in the broadcast. In the district court for the Northern District of Texas, that's the Fort Worth Division, the state of Texas LOT, that means Texas and other parties, attorney generals, versus United States LOT defendant, and and California LOT interveners and defendants in the lawsuit. The brief of the American Hospital Association, Federation of Hospitals and Catholic Health Association of the United States, Associations of American Medical Colleges, the Hiroshimaana briefs support the interveners defendants, and who represents whom here. Catherine Stinson, and that's Hogan Lovett, LLP in Washington, D.C. And let's see, Melinda Reed Hatton, one of the people there, the American Hospital Association, Center for the American Hospital Association, various other people that are here, additional counsel, Federation of American Hospitals, the Vice President, General Counsel of Catholic Health Association, somebody named Lisa Gladden there. The Association of American Medical Colleges, they're out of Washington, D.C. Also, Ivy Baer is one of the attorneys there. And we'll go now very, very quickly through the case here. Some of the table of authorities: Alaska Airlines versus Brock. That was in 1987. And King versus Barwell. That was another one here. Minnesota versus Mille Lacs Band of Ojibwe, 1999. And the Healthcare and Education Reconciliation Act of 2010. That is the act. And Patient Protection Affordable Care Act, also in the table of authorities. And other authorities here, more table of authorities mentioned here, various articles by various people, including the Congressional Budget Office repealing the individual health insurance mandates. That was in 2017. We're just highlighting some of these very long table of authorities, the interests of the amici curiae, and we mentioned who they were. The American Hospital Association, they represent 5,000. The Association of American Medical Colleges, 151 accredited U.S. and 17 accredited Canadian medical schools, 400 major teaching hospitals, etc., including 51 Department of Veteran Affairs medical centers also that are involved in this. The argument: the court shall be clear about what plaintiffs seek, the judicial repeal of the Affordable Care Act. Plaintiffs thus purpose unwinding the last 8 years of the program, throwing tens of millions off of the insurance rolls and returning them to the ranks of a long-term uninsured, who have demonstratively worse health outcomes. The ACA repeal may serve plaintiffs' health care policies, preferences, but the rest of the country, which has received from the Act's expanded health insurance, a stable individual insurance market, and expanded Medicaid safety net, a judgment for the plaintiffs would be disastrous. If the plaintiffs prevail, which they did, more Americans will go without basic medical care, and more Americans will wait to seek medical care until they are more seriously ill and difficult to successfully treat. Nothing in the law or logic requires that result. The timing, as the saying goes, is everything. In Congress enacted the Affordable Care Act. That was in 2010. It wrote on a blank slate. It viewed the individual mandates and its accompanying penalties as an important component of the reforms. The act would make this nation's healthcare system. When Congress revised the act in 2017, with the benefits of 7 years of experience, it decided that the individual mandates was ultimately less important to the project of ensuring access to coverage than the rest of the package of reforms, and it zeroed out the penalty associated with non-compliance. As state interveners explain, even the mandates as amended is still a tax, and the mandates is therefore still unconstitutional. But if the court rules that the individual mandate is unconstitutional without monetary penalty, then it should conduct its severability analysis under the Act as it stands today, and as it stands today, the individual mandate is severable for the rest of the severable, from the rest of the Act, and after which Congress had chosen it in 2017. This court should decline to give plaintiffs the result of they seeking to repeal the entire ACLU. The current individual mandate is severable from the rest of the ACA. If the court concludes the individual mandates without penalty for non-compliance does not pass constitutional muster, the court then must determine whether the provisions can be exercised for the rest of the ACC, which is essentially an inquiry into the legislative intent. That was the Minnesota versus Mille Lacs ban of Ojibwe. The normal rule is that partial rather than facial invalidation is required. Of course, they cite some Blockett versus Spokane. Won't get into all of these cases here. Plaintiffs cannot clear of that high hurdle. Any hortatory effects of that the current individual mandates may have is not necessary to sustain the ACLU. There is no evidence that the Congress that removed the penalty back in the mandates would have preferred no ACA. The ACA adopted a series of interlocking reforms designed to expand coverage in the individual health care mandate market. King versus Barwell there. It worked as in early 2017 there were 28.1 million uninsured in America, 20.5 million fewer than in 2010. And they cite a statistical study here by Robin Cohen of National Health Insurance Coverage early release estimate from the National Health Review Survey. And you're going to find a lot of this type of activity here. When the ACA was enacted, its major provisions were often referred to as a three-legged stool. The guaranteed issuance and community rating provision formed the first leg of prohibiting insurers from discriminating against Americans on the basis of pre-existing conditions or other conditions such as claims history, gender, and to a certain extent age. Subsidies through premium tax credits and cost sharing reduced payments formed the second leg, making the coverage and used that coverage feasible for Americans who would otherwise be unable to afford it. And the individual mandates formed the third leg, expanding the risk pool to the healthy as well as to the sick. And that what had happened there was the way that they put that, people would be penalized on their in their income tax situation, but the charge would be there, but there was no penalty. In other words, if there was a $300 penalty, it would just be on your tax bill. You did not have to pay it at that point in time. It expanded the Medicaid programs, permitting adults with income up to 133% of the poverty level to obtain coverage under the program. Requiring that states participate in Medicaid expansion, it mandated that employers with 50 or more full-time workers provide health care to the workers. To continue the analogy then, the ACA had several other legs that are critical to supporting the regime. Moreover, the act, three legs that did not contribute equally to the expansion of coverage in the individual markets. This is a key point here. It turned out to date that the individual mandates have a smaller effect than expected. One study found that the subsidies account for 41% of the 2014 coverage gains that could be attributed to the ACA Obamacare. And we go on here, the rest of these gains came from the Medicaid program. 29% of the total attributed to enrollment due to increased awareness of those already eligible and have not yet enrolled, such as children. Another 30% attributed to the Medicaid expansion. Even then, the gains that attributed to Obamacare together accounted for only 60% of the total increase in 2014 gains. The Kaiser Foundation poll adds to the explanation of why individual mandates have proven less important than the original expected. It found fewer people who purchase insurance through the individual markets view the individual mandates as the main reason, no doubt. And you see where the argument is going here. The argument is basically saying these the mandates, penalties, or what do you want to call it, did not really go into people's decisions to purchase through the exchange. For example, in the run-up to the amendment, the Congressional Budget Office examined the effects of coverage repeal of nearly all of the ACA reforms. The bill on the review would have repealed major reforms in two phases. First, it would have repealed the employee and individual mandates, and second, it would have repealed the Medicaid expansion and subsidies. Big argument about that. It goes on and on and on. And we are going on and on through this. The upshot is the current individual mandates is clearly severable from the rest of the ACA. And they cite some cases here. Alaska Airlines, that's been around a long time, versus Brock, that was in 1987. That case has been used for many, many things. Anyway, Congress would have preferred ending the ACA project together, or even ending it only in the current individual mandates. Reaching conclusion would have required accepting the implausible premise that Congress would have preferred to forego all of the gains of Obamacare. Plaintiffs should not be allowed to get through the court and repeal the entire ACLU as they did. The plaintiff's only response is to head back in time to 2010 to examine the intent of Congress with respect to Obamacare as enacted. They point to the congressional findings enacted alongside the original mandate, which they said read to express a congressional view that the individual mandates is so integral to the ACA that for severability purposes the ACU cannot survive without it. And they make some sponsoring here. Fundamentally, how Congress saw the interactiveness of the various provisions of Obamacare does not inform how Congress saw the interactiveness of various provisions in 2017. Accepting the plaintiff's severability argument and striking down the ACA would devastate patients in hospitals they rely on for care. Now, that has been talked about. Make no mistake about what plaintiffs seek, the wholesale judicial repeal of the ACA. That would be devastating consequences, kicking millions of Americans off of coverage and inflicting them with all the harm that comes from being uninsured. These harms would fall upon the low-income families least able to cope with it. Striking down the act would eliminate coverage gains since 2010. That's 8 years of gains. And they cited a study here from the Urban Institute, the cost of ACA repeal. The ACA coverage were first going into effect. 53.5 million or 19.4 million percent of the population would be uninsured compared to 47.5% of there. And let us move on here. A sharp increase in the uninsured and underinsured plaintiffs would also harm the hospitals, etc. That's why they intervened in this lawsuit. And in short, granting plaintiffs the relief they seek would devastate both patients that depend on it. No doubt about that. And this is the conclusion here. The Miki brief, which I've read to you. This is actually the brief itself. Now, the judge's conclusion we'll have to say. Let me just very quickly go to the judge, and we'll just this is O'Connor overturned the sprawling act. The ruling came on the deadline. I think we got that in. And from the Attorney General of California, Xavier Becerra, who led a group there, it was not immediately clear what the legal path would be from here. Technically, O'Connor granted a summary judgment now to the plaintiffs. That basically said that the defendants proved nothing. The Texas Attorney General, with support of 18 counterparts and the governor, the judge did not. Because the judge did not grant an injunction as the plaintiffs asked for there, it's unclear whether it is a final judgment or whether it is appealable or whether it can be stayed. And now that is an interesting situation there. He granted a summary judgment more than likely. And one of the things to remember, summary judgments usually, particularly in state civil litigation, are not very important. They are appealable most of the time. There are occasions when they dismiss it without prejudice. Let me wake up here. With prejudice here, the lawsuit was initiated by the infamous Ken Payton, and they traced their arguments to the Supreme Court ruling. That was in 212 from the Chief Roberts, who wrote for the majority. This thing is headed back to the Supreme Court. There's no doubt about that. During oral arguments, O'Connor asked more questions of the Democrat than the Republican. We know where O'Connor stood in this whole situation. There's no doubt about that. He was indeed pro the Republican stance. He's a conservative judge appointed. He was appointed by G.W. Bush. Did not immediately rule on requests indicate when he would do it, but he has done it now. The hearing is part of a lawsuit filed by the Texas Attorney General. This summary judgment situation here. What we'll do is we'll do a special broadcast on this, and when we do it, we'll get it in. Let's go to Uncle Carl now. Oops. Where's Uncle? No. We'll get Uncle Carl Robe in a minute here, up here, and where's Uncle? Well, we'll get him in a minute. Okay. Here we go. Uncle Carl Robe, he was writing in the Wall Street Journal, as normally he does. We'll assume he's writing in the Wall Street Journal. On the 13th of December 2018, he called it the cynicism of Georgia's Stacey Abrams. In one state, for one candidate, the 2018 election the 2018 midterm election isn't over. Georgia gubernatorial hopeful Stacey Abrams lost to Kemp by 54,000 votes. The final percentage there was 52.2% to 48.8%. The turnout was 3.9 million, the biggest ever in the Peach State. Ms. Abrams insists that she cannot concede that the outcome is right, true, and proper, and that the issue is what she calls Kemp's appalling actions as the Secretary of State, something unheard of. A Secretary of State being running for governor and deciding his own contest. She asserts this. His objection was a suppression of the votes of people's suppression of people's democratic rights to vote in a deliberate and intentional effort that left the election rotten and rigged. Because democracy failed in Georgia, Ms. Abrams has filed a lawsuit. She's seeking to do more than overturn the state law. She wants to brand, and she's already done this, Kemp a racist election thief and discredit his tenure as governor. He's already been discredited. He has claimed that Kemp unlawfully purged, and this is a fact, 1.5 million for the rolls, putting 53,000 new registrants on hold and creating long lines at the polls and misplacing provisional ballots. She said her accusations are based entirely on evidence. Let's take a look. First, removing the names from the registration rolls. Now, this is the 1993 National Vote Act passed by Congress, called Motor Voter, signed by Bill Clinton, required states to keep a list accurate and current by identifying persons who died or moved or using uniform and non-discriminatory procedures. The Georgia law to comply with state action is similar to Ohio, which the Supreme Court have held. Ohio's law itself is very skeptical. It works like this. If the U.S. Postal Service change of address list, it shows the Georgia voter has moved and is no longer at the address. A record, the state sends him, or it should be her, a postage paid confirmation reply. If there's no response in 30 days, the vote is considered inactive, but could still vote if he does not turn out in the next two federal election. He's removed from the rolls. The removal process can take as long as 7 years, and the impact of those removals. Kemp was a secretary. A number of Georgians registered to vote rose from 5.8 million before he took office to 6.9 million this year. And the reason they did was because of Stacey Abrams, not him. Then the change of holding up of holding up registration applications. This involves the state's exact match law. Now, that in itself is, as Mackenzie Control would say, more red tape. They required the last name, first name, initial, date of birth, and other simple information on the voter registration application to match the information on the Social Security database. Our Georgia driver's license file. If it's not matched, the prospective voter is notified online or by mail and given 26 months to correct the discrepancy. That discrepancy didn't happen. Meanwhile, he could vote by presenting a valid ID that is a substantial match with his application. Well, the valid ID could have a different address on it. Now, the 11th Circuit Court recently upheld a similar law in Florida. And that is one of the problems in Florida and in Georgia. These laws suppressed voting, no doubt about it. Local boards in Georgia's 159 counties check registration forms against a database. The Secretary of State's office only the backdrop. Abrams herself may be responsible for many of the botched registration applications. Before running for governor, she led a $12.5 million voter registration drive that paid her $422,000 over 3 years. I guess if we look at that, what is that? A little over $100,000 a year for serving as its part-time leader. Despite ample resources, the effort relied on paper forms, not online registrations or electronic forms. As a result, many contained mistakes, fraudulent. It wasn't fraudulent signatures. There could have been some mistakes, but not as many. And again, they had to go back to these individual counties. And many of those individual counties rejected the countless registration forms. But next time around, Uncle Carl can, as they say, bet his whatever, that it will all be computerized. That is in the works. The people going out and doing the fetching of voters will have these little pad-type devices, probably Android devices, that they will do this, and they will be linked with not only their database, but with the state database itself. That can be easily done and can eliminate some of the problems here, Uncle Carl, now that you know this. Now, let us go on here to the workers. This is from Vox. Their headline's a little different. We'll read. It says Amazon workers say they don't have time to praise the Muslim workers. Now they are fighting for their rights. This is in the upper Midwest city of Minneapolis. Chandra Ibrahim is one. She's a single mother of two and a Somali immigrant living in Minneapolis, and has worked at the fulfillment center for 2 years. And the warehouse's current package rate is 240 boxes an hour, Ibrahim says, but it goes as high as 400. Associates are penalized if they fall behind this rate. They can get a write-up from a manager if they are too slow. But she's been there for 2 years, so she's fast enough. Ibrahim, who works 12-hour night shifts from 5:30 p.m. to 6 in the morning. She says she works about 20 different jobs since, she has worked about 20 different jobs since moving to the U.S. as a 16-year-old. These jobs include working on a fishing boat in the middle of the ocean off the coast of Alaska, cleaning the O'Hare Airport, a Target warehouse. She's been everywhere. Ibrahim says more than 3,000 workers in the Minneapolis area warehouses. 3,000 are African immigrants. And on Friday she will join many of these. They've already done this. The workers are accusing the company of mistreating them. Are both refugees and non-refugees. Some come from countries like Somalia, Ethiopia, Kenya. Local press has referred to them as to Minneapolis as Little Mogadishu. So you can see what's going on there. Amazon, let's see, the Wow Center says he heard from many immigrant workers that they do not feel supported by the company, even though they are aggressively recruited. Well, they can't find anyone else, so they have to find a warm body to get in there. People frequently talk about the pressure, and I've heard this from workers all over the country. During Ramadan and Eid, the employees have the right to use personal time off there. So there's some there. Is part of a larger movement, and this is important right here. Workers in Spain, Poland, Germany, Italy, France used Prime Day to strike, and this is something that people have to understand. That this is just not combined here. The Black Friday action of workers in various places, including Spain. Let me just go on here. This is a local paper, the Star Tribune. Somali workers cite a special challenge at a local fulfillment center. The head of the Jeff Bios doesn't know who his workers are or what they face with. That is from somebody named Hassan said, through an interpreter, we are not getting what we need from Amazon. So he joined the protests. The Amazon spokesman, somebody named Ashley Robinson, she was unaware of that situation, but the company takes allegations seriously. However, she disputes the claims that full-time workers don't immediately have access to medical care. Now, let's see. She passed out while working lifting a heavy box. That has happened at many of this, and started bleeding. And that was when she was pregnant. She reported to the Amazon office for assistance, and she said she was denied services because her benefits had not yet kicked in. Oh boy. Everyone gets full coverage starting from day one. That's according to Robinson. We'll see about this. The rally followed multiple meetings between the Amazon management and leaders of the East African community. Now, this was a first. This is 885,000 square foot fulfillment center. Employs of more than 1,500 workers. 30% of them are from of East African immigrants. Dozens of police officers lined the front entrance until the peaceful demonstration. Protesters retreated to the streets. No one was arrested, and it's interesting how they wrote this article here. The representative Omar praised the participants for raising their voices and standing up to management. People who are going to receive those holiday gifts and packages you're putting together need to know that every worker here is not fully happy. Let me just give you a little bit of a sound here from the demonstration.
Our backs are tied and our funds are low, hey Jeff! Bezos! Our backs are tied and our funds are low, hey Jeff! People who are going to receive those gifts, the packages that you guys are putting together, need to know that every worker here is not fully happy. Their dignity is not being uplifted. For the honest work they're putting in, that is not being respected. And when we work, we expect there to be dignity. We expect there to be respect.
This is represented.
We expect there to be fair compensation. If you don't act today, the next person that gets hired gets to live with the burdens that you have carried. So every struggle you're going through today makes it easier for the next person and the next person.
People have a voice, and we are 100% supportive of it. We know here at Amazon we work hard every day to make sure everyone feels valued and included.
This is
here
a
in the fulfillment center,
spokes-type
and
for
part of that
Amazon.
includes some of the great compensation and benefits. Employees here get about $16 to $20 an hour. They've got continuing education opportunities. They've got upward mobility. We are excited to create great jobs here and have an awesome workforce. And the community is important, and we're happy to continue working with them.
You know, the sad reality is this: America benefits off the back of new immigrants. New immigrants in this country are the hardest working people. They do the jobs where there are no unions to be found. They do the jobs where companies take advantage of them. But the reality is this. This is how America has been built.
The people!
It was the workers in the upper Midwest state of Minnesota on Friday. Let me just check our time here. And we're doing okay here. Let's see if we can get the Emerson poll up here. Otherwise, we'll do it on Monday. Perhaps we'll have to do it on Monday. Well, we'll do the sports, I suppose. When in doubt, always do sports. And this is what happened in the National Basketball. Yesterday in the NBA, the Hawks were in Boston. The Celtics 129-108. The Knickerbockers, where were they? They were in with the Hornets in Charlotte. 126-124. The Knicks. The Wizards were at the Nets in Jersey. It was the Nets 125-118. The Bucks were in Cleveland. Bucks 114-102 for the Cavaliers. The Pacers were in the city of brotherly love. 113-101. The Heat was at the Grizzlies. Let me make sure I'm doing this right. Yeah, I am. The Heat was at the Grizzlies. Okay. Hey, whoops. It was the Heat 100-97. The Thunder was in Denver. Nuggets 109-89. The Raptors were out in Portland at 128 for the Trailblazers to 122 for the Raptors. And finally, the Warriors were at the Kings. The Warriors 130-125. And on we go to the National Hockey League. And I've got to get scores up here. All right. We always get the music first, and nonetheless, the Golden Knights were at the Devils in Detroit. It was an overtime game. Devils 5-4. The Coyotes and Rangers. It was Coyotes another overtime game. 4-3 over the Rangers. The Bruins and the Penguins in Pittsburgh. It was the Penguins 5-3. The Senators and Red Wings. It was the Senators 4-2. The final there. And another overtime game. The Capitals and Hurricanes. It was the Capitals 6-5 over the Hurricanes and the Avalanche and Blues in St. Louis. Another overtime game was the Blues of 4-3. And the Jets and Blackhawks in Chicago. It was the Winnipeg Jets 4-3 over the Blackhawks in another overtime. A lot of overtime games going on here. The Flyers and Oilers. It was the Oilers 4-1. And our voice did more or less hold up here. And so we got it done. The week that was on the 15th of December 2018. We have a numbers man production. That is our economics program coming from the macro level. We'll be talking about where the economy is, what is going on across the EU, France. The PCI fell there, and Germany, the UK, and the Brexit situation. The UK doesn't look good for the UK non-Tory government there in the UK. One of many things, we didn't take a look out at San Diego. We usually take a look out there every broadcast because they are at the epicenter of of the action there being right across from Tijuana. The headline, of course, they have here is federal judge in Texas rules entire Obama healthcare law unconstitutional. And we don't really... oh boy. Anyway, we don't have anything, as they say, coming out of the bridge and the incidents there. And finally, we've been looking here all day. Let me just get the opinion up here. This is a partial summary judgment. The PDF here. This is a memorandum. The United States healthcare system touches millions of lives in a daily and deeply personal way. Health insurance policy is therefore political charged affair. Here the plaintiffs allege the following. And let me just finish up his memoranda here. This is quite long. We'll do a special program on this, an easier way of doing this. There are times when you can do things much easier, and we'll do it here much easier. We'll go to the PDF. Anyway, to read from it, it is in the Northern District of Texas, in Fort Worth, Texas, and this is a memoranda in order. I think I have time, though, to get to the order. Oops. Conclusion for Region State above. The court grants plaintiffs partial summary judgment and declares the individual mandates as 26 U.S. Unconstitutional, and further the court declares that the remaining portions inseparable and therefore invalid. The court grants plaintiffs a claim for declaratory relief in count 1 of the amended complaint, and we'll have to get to that one on what Judge O'Connor said in his conclusion. We will get to that. We'll just have to have a special report, but we thought we would get that in. We'll deal with It's Cold Outside later here. Excuse me, that's been on the shelf. And we're lucky this weekend we'll have an open source report also. Have a good weekend, everyone. We'll talk to you on the Monday Morning Quarterback on Monday morning. This is Old Boston Red from the Jerry Pippin broadcast booth